Carlos Pereira was in his mother's elegantly decorated living room on yet another Monday morning, which meant he should have been at his own home. However, his mother refused to accept that. After the previous night's dinner, he took one last look at himself in the mirror. His chiseled face seemed to have been sculpted from the same stone as the enormous houses surrounding him. "Carlos, dear, you should wear the navy suit for today's meeting. It makes you look more mature rather than this one," his mother, Helena Pereira, said as she entered his room holding a cup of coffee. Carlos closed his eyes and tilted his face upward. "Mom, I feel..." "Don't forget to tie your tie properly. I can't have you looking like some sort of bohemian," she interrupted. He rolled his eyes in frustration as he adjusted his tie for the 100th time that morning. Noticing his mother's gaze still on him, he headed to the room on the right, where his suits were organized. Taking one of the suits from the hanger, he quickly put it on, not wanting to be late. As he left the room, she was waiting at his door. "Don't forget the speech I prepared for you. Once you tell everyone, they'll be convinced. I'll be there before the meeting," she said. "But shouldn't I write something myself? If I tell them how I truly feel about moving the company forward, they'd be eager to be part of it," Carlos replied. Helena sipped her coffee slowly, her face immediately tightening as the coffee had gone cold, just like her smile. "I told you about these matters. Just trust me, Carlos. Do as I say," she said, placing her free hand on his shoulder. Carlos knew exactly what she meant. She wanted him to do her bidding once more, as always. Her words sounded like a threat. "All right, Mom. I need to organize the packages for the orphanage first, and then I'll head to work," he replied. He kissed her cheek before leaving the room and the house. Stepping out of the grand mansion into the fresh morning air, his driver, Joaquim, was already waiting by the car. "Good morning, sir." "Good morning, Joaquim. Please take me to the orphanage," Carlos replied. He settled into the back seat as they drove through the city. He gazed out the window as his mind wandered to the upcoming meeting. His mother had prepared a rather long speech, and he wasn't exactly looking forward to it, but he knew very well that he couldn't disobey her. The 20-minute drive ended with their arrival at the orphanage, a combination of 2 large apartments surrounded by a small garden. A woman was already waiting outside with a smile. He got out of the car and was immediately greeted by her warm smile. "Good morning, Sister Margarida." "Ah, Carlos dear, thank you for coming. We're very grateful for your family's support," she said, quickly shaking his hand. Carlos smiled and followed her inside, where he was welcomed by the buzz of children. He spent the next hour helping out. Carlos spent the next hour organizing packages of food and clothing he had sent earlier that day, chatting with the children and listening to their stories. "Sir, your mother," Joaquim said, approaching Carlos, who was reading a book to the children, and handed him the phone. Carlos quickly stood up, realizing that if he didn't leave now, he would be late for the meeting he needed to attend. As he prepared to leave, Sister Margarida approached him with a small box. "Carlos, a small gift from the children for your mother," she said. Touched by the gesture, Carlos took the box and replied, "Thank you, sister. I'll make sure she gets it." With a final wave to everyone, he hurried back to the car, and Joaquim drove off swiftly from the orphanage, knowing they needed to beat the clock. When Carlos arrived at the office, he took a deep breath and headed to the conference room where the meeting was being held. His secretary was already waiting with the prepared speech. Carlos handled the papers, trying to scan the pages quickly. "Good morning, everyone," he began, trying to sound confident as he entered the conference room. "I'm here today to talk about Verde technology. Our solar panels harness solar energy and reduce carbon emissions by 50%. He paused, struggling to recall the exact figures. He glanced at his notes, but his eyes skimmed the page without focus. "Ah, yes. And our wind turbines generate electricity at a rate of 2.5 megawatts. The clients exchanged glances, apparently unimpressed. One raised an eyebrow, while another jotted something down in his notebook. Carlos attempted to recover, but his words only grew more confused. And our energy storage systems use advanced battery technology to optimize energy efficiency and reduce waste. He stopped, struggling to remember the key points he wanted to make. The client's expressions grew increasingly skeptical. He closed his eyes for a second, trying to regroup. The room fell silent, and Carlos felt the eyes of the executives and, more importantly, his mother on him. He knew he was struggling but couldn't find his footing. "Let me start over," he said, taking a deep breath. "I'm sorry, I'll get straight to the point." Avoiding his mother's gaze, he had a bad feeling from the start about using something his mother had written, and despite practicing, he still felt uncomfortable. "Look, I know we're not just selling solar panels and wind turbines. We're offering a chance to make a difference, a chance to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels and create a more sustainable future. At Verde Technology, we believe our responsibility extends beyond merely providing sustainable energy solutions. We're committed to making a positive impact on the communities we serve." Pointing to the screen behind him, he displayed a content table. The Green Schools program provides educational resources and workshops to teach children about renewable energy and sustainability. We've also partnered with local organizations to create community gardens and green spaces, offering access to fresh produce and fostering environmental responsibility, he added. Moreover, we are committed to transparency and accountability in everything we do. We publish annual sustainability reports that outline our progress and impact. Additionally, we have an independent advisory board to ensure our practices align with our values and mission. Carlos paused, scanning the room to make eye contact with the clients. "We believe that businesses can be a force for good, and we are dedicated to leading by example." The listeners paid close attention, their expressions shifting from skepticism to interest. "I believe in what we do," Carlos said with a smile, his conviction evident. "And I know that together we can make a real difference." The room fell silent for a moment before erupting in applause. The clients nodded in approval, smiling. "Thank you, Carlos," one of them finally said, glancing at his colleagues. "That was a great presentation. It's clear you're passionate about what your company does." Another executive spoke up. "I have to admit, I was skeptical at first, but you've truly convinced me of your company's values. Can you tell us more about what you do?" Carlos, relieved that the presentation had gone well, smiled and said, "Certainly. Our company, Verde Technology, specializes in sustainable energy solutions. We design and implement renewable energy systems for businesses and homes, helping them reduce their carbon footprint and save on energy costs." One of the executives asked, "That sounds impressive. Can you give us some examples of your work?" Carlos nodded. "We've partnered with several major companies to install solar panels and wind turbines, cutting their energy costs by up to 50%. We also assist homeowners in transitioning to renewable energy sources, decreasing their reliance on fossil fuels." The executives nodded, taking notes and asking follow-up questions. After a few minutes of Q&A, one of them said, "Thank you, I think we've found a partner." Carlos exited the conference room, feeling relieved that the presentation had gone well. As he entered his office, his mother followed closely, looking less than pleased. "Carlos, what was that?" she demanded, shutting the door behind her. "You didn't stick to the plan." He looked at her, trying to remain calm. "Mum, I know I didn't follow the script, but I felt I needed to speak from the heart. Speaking from the heart is fine, but this is business, Carlos, not a charity event to make you feel good. You need to follow the plan and make a strong impression." "But Mom, I think I made a good impression. The clients seemed to respond well to my enthusiasm." She interrupted him again. "It's not about enthusiasm, Carlos. It's about doing business and growing the company. Focus on the end result, not your feelings," she said without another word. Carlos walked past his mother, opening the door. "I need some air," he said. "Carlos, what are you doing? You can't just leave in the middle of the day." his mother began to protest, but he was already determined not to spend another minute with her. As he left the building, Joaquim, his driver, was waiting by the car, looking somewhat concerned. "Sir, should I take you somewhere?" he asked. "No, Joaquim, I need some time alone. I'll drive myself. I'll be fine." Joaquim, despite his concern, saw that there was nothing he could do and reluctantly accepted. Carlos got into the car and drove away, wanting to be far from everything. He drove aimlessly, trying to clear his mind until he found himself in a quiet, seemingly upscale neighborhood. He parked the car in a safe spot and wandered the streets, trying to process his emotions. His steps led him to a small restaurant tucked away among skyscrapers. The exterior was unremarkable, but something about it drew him in. He pushed open the door, and a bell above it chimed, breaking the silence. As he entered, his eyes slowly adjusted to the lighting, and he saw a young woman cleaning tables with a white cloth. Her dark hair was tied in a ponytail, and a warm smile appeared on her lips when she looked up and met his gaze. For a moment, they just stared at each other. "Hello," she said, dropping the cloth on the table and breaking the spell. "Welcome to Still No Name," she laughed, and Carlos's heart skipped a beat. "We're not open yet, but you should come back in a week for our grand opening." As he prepared to leave, Carlos caught his reflection in the window, a young man feeling that he wanted more. He took a deep breath, savoring the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the warmth of the restaurant. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. "But if you don't mind, I can get you something to drink," she offered. "We're still testing our menu, but I can make something special." Carlos turned and nodded eagerly as he sat at the counter, still watching her. "Try this," she said, handing him a glass of a velvety liquid. "It's one of our exclusive drinks. We call it Midnight Sky." As he took a sip, he wondered why she seemed like an enigma. His eyes widened in surprise with each sip, the flavors dancing on his tongue. He could only describe it as something between sweet and savory. "This is really amazing." He smiled at her, finishing the contents of the glass. The young woman's eyes crinkled at the corners. "I'm glad you like it. I'm sorry, I know this isn't the right time to ask, but what brought you here? The place looks quite deserted, especially from the outside." Carlos hesitated, uncertain of what to say to someone he had just met. "It's been a tough day for me. I know the day isn't over yet, but it is what it is. My mother is constantly on my case," Carlos admitted. "Well, aren't they all?" Sophia laughed, placing her hands on the counter. "What exactly has she done this time? My mother can't leave me alone. She wants to be involved in everything I do and make sure her decisions are the final ones, even when I'm against them." Carlos sighed, nodding slowly. "Even when I don't want to, and all I want is for her to see that I'm an adult. Of course she sees it, but she might not want to admit it. Maybe she just doesn't want to accept that you're no longer her little boy. Such things can be quite frightening sometimes," Sophia observed. Carlos wiped the sweat from his forehead, which only highlighted her beauty. "I didn't catch your name earlier. I'm Carlos." "I'm Sophia," she replied with a smile, stepping away from the counter. Carlos glanced at his Swiss watch, suddenly shocked at how much time had passed. "How did I spend so much time here? Was it your beauty or the drink?" Sophia gave him a knowing look, making him laugh. "Don't flatter yourself, Carlos. It's probably the drink." Carlos hesitated, not wanting the moment to end. "Can I see you again?" Sophia raised an eyebrow and gave him a playful look. "I'm not sure. I'm quite busy with the restaurant. My birthday's coming up and I'd love for you to be there. It would mean a lot to me." She laughed, her tone light. "I'm not sure. I might be tied up for a while since we're still getting everything in order here." Carlos nodded in understanding. "I get it, but we should exchange contacts. I'd like to keep in touch." "Sure, but no promises," Sophia said. "No promises, I swear. I just want to make sure I can find you again," Carlos said, feeling triumphant. "I guess I'll see you again. Take care." He left the restaurant quickly. It was a few weeks before Carlos even considered mentioning Sophia to his mother. "Carlos, what are you thinking? A Pereira doesn't associate with service industry workers," his mother remarked, setting down her spoon. Carlos shifted uncomfortably, aware that he had displeased her. "Mum, I just met her." "It doesn't matter. You need to maintain a certain social level, Carlos," she snapped, shaking her head. "You don't expect me to accept you dating a waitress. What would that say about the company?" Carlos sighed dramatically as the food suddenly tasted bland in his mouth. "Please, Mom, give her a chance. She's not at all what you think." Helena looked at her only son and smiled. "I've organized a dinner for this weekend. It was supposed to be just the two of us, but now that you've mentioned her, I'll invite Sophia." "Thank you, Mom," Carlos said, pleased that his mother had changed her mind. "I'm heading out now. I have a trip tomorrow." He barely left his mother's mansion before sending a message to Sophia about the dinner. He wanted to call her, but she had scolded him several times when he sent messages while working. It wasn't what she had planned for the weekend, but it didn't hurt to go. The weekend arrived quickly, and Sophia was struck by the grandeur of the entrance gate when she arrived at the estate. Stepping out of the taxi, she was overwhelmed by the opulent decor, feeling a mix of shock and embarrassment as she glanced at her outfit. Upon entering, she was astonished by the lavish decorations and the well-dressed staff. "Carlos, why didn't you give me a heads up?" she whispered to Carlos, who was waiting outside for her. "I feel so out of place." Carlos seemed taken aback by her reaction. "I'm sorry, Sophia. You look beautiful regardless." "Don't flatter me. I'm warning you for the last time," she playfully tapped him on the arm. "You never told me you lived in a different world." "I'm glad I didn't." He leaned closer, smiling. "Otherwise, you might not have given me your number." Sophia was about to respond when she heard someone clapping. Looking in the direction of the sound, she saw a stunning woman in a long black dress. "I would have left you two outside, but dinner is about to start. Come in, dear Sophia." Sophia exchanged a glance with Carlos, who smiled and guided her towards his mother. "This is my mother, Helena Pereira." Sophia and Helena walked into the mansion together, with Sophia trying not to let her jaw drop at how beautiful everything was. Upon reaching the dining room, which Sophia thought was larger than the entire restaurant, all the staff were lined up at the room's edges. Carlos pulled out a chair for her, making her smile as she sat down. He took a seat beside her, across from his mother, who couldn't stop eyeing them. Just as they were about to start eating, Carlos's phone rang, and he answered it. "I'm sorry, but there's something I need to take care of right now. I'll be back before you know it." He gently squeezed Sophia's hand before leaving the table. "Well, the dinner must go on. He'll join us again soon, so please eat." Helena gestured for Sophia to begin. Sophia started her meal. "Tell me, Rosa, what inspired your choice of attire?" Sophia looked up, smiling. "I just thought it was a pretty dress, Helena." Helena smiled warmly. "It's certainly eye-catching. And your job, what's it like being a waitress?" "It's an experience, to say the least. I interact with different people every day, and I enjoy it. Sometimes the restaurant gets really busy, which means everyone has to stay on their toes." "You speak as if that's a good thing," Helena remarked, as Sophia's gaze drifted. "To me, it's better than doing nothing." Speaking of which, Carlos's birthday ball will be the event of the season. The guest list is a true society selection. I dare say it will be a night to remember. We'll have royalty, celebrities, and business magnates. The mansion will be an evening of glamour and sophistication like you've never experienced, I'm sure of it. Helena paused, savoring a sip of her wine and the ambience of the place. "Oh, it will be spectacular. We've rented the entire estate, and the decorations will be exquisite. I've spared no expense to ensure this is a night to remember. After all, Carlos deserves only the best." Sophia's eyes widened slightly at the mention of such a high-profile event. She couldn't help but feel a tinge of hesitation about attending. "Oh, I'm sure it will be," Sophia replied, trying to sound nonchalant despite her growing doubts. As the evening drew to a close, Carlos escorted Sophia to the exit, thanking her for coming. "I'm sorry if my mother was a bit much," he whispered, holding her hands. Sophia offered a faint smile. "I had a good time. The only thing missing was you. You were absent for almost the entire dinner." I'm really sorry. I'm genuinely sorry, he said, pulling her into a hug. The next day, Sophia received the dress along with a note from Helena. Dear Sophia, I thought this dress would be perfect for Carlos's birthday ball. Formal events can be so daunting, and I wanted to help. Best wishes, Helena. Sophia touched the hem of the fabric, noting its luxurious feel, which pleased her. More than the cost, she appreciated the gesture. After the previous night's dinner, she was slightly convinced that Helena didn't like her, but this proved otherwise. After settling into her apartment following the dinner, she rifled through her wardrobe looking for something suitable for his birthday. Nothing would make her repeat the mistake of not dressing well again, but she didn't have to worry about that. She had something special to wear for the event. She slipped into the elegant black dress that hugged her curves perfectly. The dress fell just above her knees and featured a tasteful neckline that wasn't too revealing. She paired the dress with silver heels that added a few inches to her height. These were a gift that came with the jewelry. When she told him her mother had sent a dress, she was pleased the heels were comfortable enough for several hours. Her look was completed with a simple necklace and a pair of pearl earrings he had bought for her. She kept her hair simple, pulling it back into a low ponytail. As she looked at herself in the mirror, she felt confident and beautiful. All she needed to do now was head out and get into the car Carlos had sent for her. Arriving at the mansion, Sophia was awed by the decorations. At the door, she was met by a team of security and event staff checking invitations and IDs. Sophia approached them confidently, expecting a smooth entry. The event. A staff member greeted her, looking her up and down. "May I see your invitation, please?" She hesitated, realizing she didn't have one. "I'm a guest of Carlos," she said. "He invited me personally." The staff member raised an eyebrow. "I'm sorry, but I need to see your invitation or confirmation email to let you in." At that moment, a woman with an iPad wearing a stern expression approached them. "I'm the event coordinator," she said, holding up the iPad to verify Sophia's face. "I'm afraid this person is not on the guest list." The event coordinator turned to Sophia. "I'm sorry, but you are not authorized to enter. You'll need to leave." Sophia stepped away from the entrance and grabbed her phone. She dialed Carlos's number, hoping he would answer and clear up the misunderstanding. But the phone rang and rang with no response. Sophia tried again, thinking he might be busy or hadn't heard, but still no answer. She sent a text, trying to keep her emotions in check. "Hi, it's Sophia. I'm outside. They won't let me in. What's going on?" But there was no reply. Sophia felt a wave of worry and frustration. Why wasn't Carlos answering her calls or texts? Carlos scanned the room, looking for Sophia, who had informed him earlier that she was on her way. As the minutes ticked by, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. If she had arrived, she would have come over to say hello. Where was she? He assumed she was mingling with the guests, but as he moved through the crowd, he couldn't shake the sense that something was off. Finally, he checked his phone and saw the missed calls from Sophia. His heart sank as he quickly dialed her number. "Sophia, where are you?" he asked, alarmed by the missed calls. "I'm outside," she replied sadly. "They didn't let me in. My name wasn't on the list." Carlos's face fell as he realized the mistake. He quickly apologized and headed to the entrance where he found Sophia, stunning in the dress his mother had sent. However, as he escorted her to the celebration, he couldn't ignore the curious glances from other guests. "I'm so sorry. Truly, there must have been some sort of mix-up. Please forgive me." Sophia looked at him for a moment before walking to the champagne table and grabbing a glass for herself. "For a moment I thought about going home and forgetting the whole thing. Thank you for getting here in time." "Thank you for not leaving," he said, about to say more when a man approached, saying Carlos was needed. "I'm sorry, I'll be right back." "Enjoy yourself," he said as he walked away. At first, Sophia tried to make the best of the evening, but as the night went on, she began to sense that something was off. People were looking at her oddly, and she felt out of place, felt like it was closing in on her. "Excuse me, can you refill my drink?" Someone tapped her shoulder. The other guests seemed busy, and she hoped the request would be quick. Over her shoulder, unsure if the woman was speaking to her, she said, "Sorry, but you're mistaken. I'm not a staff member." The woman laughed. "You're serious?" That's when Sophia realized her dress was identical to the staff uniforms. She was being mistaken for a servant, and the guests found it amusing. "I'm not a servant," Sophia repeated, more to herself than to the woman. "I'm a guest." The woman looked at her disdainfully and huffed. "Sorry, I must have confused you with someone from the staff." Sophia felt a mix of embarrassment and anger. She knew she needed to find Carlos and leave as quickly as possible. Scanning the room for the bathroom, she needed to escape the mocking glances before they reached her. Fortunately, there was no one in the bathroom at that moment. She entered a stall and locked the door, seeking solitude. She heard the door open and voices fill the bathroom. "Can you believe that dress?" one of them said, turning on the faucet and laughing. "It's like she's trying to be a servant or something." "I know, right?" the other replied, also laughing. "I saw her trying to blend in with the guests and thought, 'Girl, you're not fooling anyone.'" Sophia felt a sharp pang of shame and embarrassment. She couldn't believe she had been so blind to Helena's plan. What she had thought was a kind gesture now seemed like a cruel trick. She quickly left the bathroom as the women exited, trying to hold back tears. She couldn't stand it any longer and needed to find Carlos to explain what was happening. But as she approached him, she saw Helena coming toward them with open arms. "I hope you know where you belong now," Helena whispered in her ear before Sophia could pull away from the embrace. In that moment, she knew she had to leave before things got worse. As she turned to go, a guest deliberately spilled a drink on her. "Look at the helper now. Why don't you clean that up?" someone shouted. "I've had enough," she thought, closing her eyes to hold back tears. Pushing through the growing crowd in a desperate bid to escape, she ran into a wall of paparazzi. "Who are you?" one of them asked, snapping photos. "I'm nobody, just leave me alone," she pleaded, but they continued taking pictures. On the other side of the room, Carlos was discussing business with a potential client when he heard murmurs. Looking in that direction, he spotted Sophia. "Excuse me?" Carlos interrupted the conversation and began to move towards where he last saw her. He saw her heading towards the entrance, her clothes stained and paparazzi around her. When he reached the entrance, he saw Sophia getting into a taxi. "Sophia, wait!" he called, but the taxi door closed behind her and the car drove away. He needed to make things right. He picked up the phone and dialed her number, but it went straight to voicemail. He tried again and again, but she didn't answer. He knew he needed to speak with her, explain what had happened, and apologize for his mother's mistake. But for now, she was gone, and Carlos was left alone outside his own party, feeling powerless and embarrassed. Weeks passed, and Carlos's distraction at work worsened. His mother, Helena, noticed the change and confronted him. "Carlos, what's going on with you? You're not focused on the company at all. We can't afford to lose our edge now that we're on the brink of being taken over." Carlos sighed, rubbing his temples. "I know, Mom. I'll try to focus." But he couldn't get Sophia out of his mind. He tried to immerse himself in work, but his thoughts kept drifting back to her. He wondered if she was okay, if she had forgiven him. As days turned into weeks, Carlos became increasingly withdrawn. He stopped attending meetings, answering calls, and leaving his office. His mother grew worried, but Carlos couldn't explain what was wrong. He didn't even know himself. One night, he found himself outside the restaurant where they had first met, hoping to see her, but she wasn't there. The next day he drove to her house, but she wasn't there either. Feeling desperate, Carlos decided to wait for her outside her apartment. He arrived in the morning and sat in his car, watching the entrance. As the hours passed, he began to feel like he was hallucinating, but then he saw her. His heart skipped a beat. He wondered if he was dreaming, but Sophia saw him and smiled. "Carlos, what are you doing here?" she asked, standing by the window. He got out of the car, feeling like he was in a daze. I don't know. I just needed to see you. Sophia nodded, and Carlos followed her into the apartment, feeling like he was stepping into a dream. The room was decorated with various hand-drawn characters. Sophia led him to the sofa, and they sat together. I missed you, Carlos began to say immediately. Sophia took his hand. I missed you too. They sat there in silence for a moment, their hands intertwined. Then Sophia spoke. I've been thinking a lot about us, Carlos, about what happened at the party. Carlos nodded, feeling a pang of guilt. I'm so sorry, Sophia. I didn't know what happened until later when I heard someone had spilled wine on you. Sophia squeezed his hand. You didn't know. It was hard for me. I felt so alone and exposed out there. I'm sorry, Sophia. I should have known, and I shouldn't have left you alone. It's been hard waking up every morning knowing I can't reach you. It's been pure torture. She smiled, seeing the pain in his eyes, understanding it had been hard for him too. Let's have dinner then. What's the best way to celebrate this? Carlos exclaimed, hugging her and holding her as if he would never let go. Thank you for forgiving me. I'm grateful beyond words. He kept murmuring his thanks, holding her tightly. Only after some time, once she had freshened up, did they decide to go out for dinner. As they left the apartment hand in hand, Carlos noticed a black limousine parked behind his car. His pace slowed, catching Sophia's attention, and she followed his gaze. What's my mother doing? He murmured to himself. As Sophia gripped his hand tighter, her eyes widened when the chauffeur emerged from the limousine and approached them. Miss Sophia, your grandfather requests your immediate presence, the chauffeur said. Carlos's eyes narrowed at the man, standing protectively in front of Sophia. Who is your grandfather? He demanded. I don't understand what's happening, but I need to go, Sophia said. The chauffeur opened the door, waiting for Sophia to enter. Please, Miss Sophia, your grandfather is waiting. Sophia turned to Carlos. Come with me. Of course, I wouldn't follow just anyone, he replied. As they got into the limousine, Sophia's anxiety grew. I've never seen my grandfather send a limousine before. Something must be wrong. I hope he's okay. The last time he wasn't well, he didn't tell me. I hope it's nothing serious. Carlos squeezed her hand, trying to comfort her. We'll face this together. The limousine pulled up to a large office building with the Verde Technology logo displayed on the side. Wait, why are we here? This is your family's building, right? Sophia asked as they got out of the car. Carlos was trying to figure out why they were there. Looking back at the chauffeur, he motioned for them to enter. They quickly went inside, and after exiting the elevator, Carlos and Sophia heard someone speaking in one of the offices. Carlos recognized the place immediately, and they arrived there still puzzled. A man with his back to them was addressing people in the room about how things would be done differently. Someone in the room must have alerted him because he turned around, smiling. Ah, there she is. Your new CEO has arrived, he announced, and the room erupted in applause. Grandpa, Sophia advanced, relieved to see him well but confused by his announcement. Sophia's grandfather laughed. Yes, my dear, I'm afraid I've kept my true identity and wealth hidden from you, but I've been preparing you for leadership all along. Carlos's mind raced as he processed the news. Sophia, the woman he loved, was now the CEO of Verde Technology. His mother had mentioned some issues regarding the new leader, but he had been out of sorts. Sophia's grandfather continued, I had you work in one of my restaurants, with my security monitoring your progress. You've shown great potential, my dear, and now it's time for you to take charge. Helena's face turned pale, her eyes darting between Sophia and Carlos. This can't be, she whispered. Jorge's expression grew stern as he pulled Helena into his office, along with Carlos and Sophia. At the birthday party, Helena's treatment of my beloved granddaughter was unforgivable. Helena's eyes darted between Jorge, Carlos, and Sophia as she felt the color drain from her face. I can explain, Helena began, but Jorge cut her off. No, you can't. My initial plan was to sell the company in pieces, leaving you and your son with scraps after paying the board. But seeing how much my granddaughter loves Carlos and how much he loves her, and since he wasn't part of the scheme, I changed my mind. Carlos's eyes widened in shock. What do you mean, what happened at the party? Sophia took a deep breath. My mother humiliated me, Carlos. She made me wear a uniform identical to the staff's, and people thought I was a servant. Mother, is this true? Why would you do something like that to her? He demanded, moving closer to his mother, who avoided his gaze. It was then that he remembered the looks people gave her when she arrived at the event. That's why you didn't want me away from her after the incident at my birthday. This will be the last conversation we have. I never thought you would go so far as to treat her so badly. You should be better than that. Jorge nodded. I'm glad to see you're not like your mother, Carlos, but now it doesn't depend on me. Ask the new CEO. No, I don't think you should be an employee here, Carlos said, accepting their decision. He understood how things might end up. Why do I think you'd be better managing? Carlos thought he must be hearing things, but her smile confirmed he had heard correctly. Are you serious? Do you mean that? Yes, I do. You've proven yourself, Carlos. You have the heart and skills to lead this company to greatness. Carlos pulled her into an embrace, breathing in her perfume. Thank you, my love. In the corner of the room, Helena watched her son and the girl she thought had been dealt with embracing. It was more humiliating for her than for her son, as if she didn't even exist. She stayed there until Jorge invited them to a quick celebratory dinner. Only then did she collapse, falling to her knees as tears streamed down her face. She couldn't help but wish she could turn back time. She had expected many things, but she never anticipated everything going so wrong for her. She began to realize when she went to her favorite social club for lunch, the maître d' looked at her coldly, and her usual table by the window had been given to someone else. I'm sorry, but we're fully booked today, Mrs. Pereira. Helena was shocked. She had always been treated like royalty at that club. As she left, she saw her friends whispering and pointing at her. They quickly turned away, avoiding eye contact. Helena felt a chill run down her spine. She tried to dismiss the feeling, telling herself it was just her imagination, but as the days went by, things only got worse. She was no longer invited to exclusive events, and the isolation was growing. Her calls were no longer returned, her bank account dwindled, and she realized that her money couldn't get her anywhere. Helena's world was collapsing around her. She had lost everything, her reputation, her friends, her status, all due to her own cruel actions. She tried to reach out to her son Carlos, but he refused to answer her calls. He had disowned her, just like everyone else, and it hurt even more. If only she had been more sensible and mature, she wouldn't be in this disaster. She never imagined that one day everything she once had would be gone. As Sophia pushed the stroller through the quiet streets of the neighborhood, she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of contentment. Her life had taken a dramatic turn since meeting Carlos, and she was grateful for every moment they spent together. Their daughter Esmeralda was the light of their lives, and Sophia couldn't imagine a future without her. She took a deep breath, savoring the sweet scent of blooming flowers and fresh bread from the nearby bakeries. Reflecting on her life, she thought about all the good things that had happened since she met Carlos. She remembered how he looked at her on their first date, the picnic they had weeks after he started working as CEO, and how he held her hand while teaching her to ride a bike. She thought about their wedding day, which came so quickly, but she wasn't nervous. She had what she once thought was unattainable. Her ever-loving grandfather had done everything to make the day perfect for her. She couldn't wish for anything more. And of course there was Esmeralda, their beautiful daughter. Sophia's heart swelled with love as she thought about her little girl while pushing the stroller. She felt thankful for the life she had built, for how Carlos supported, encouraged and loved her for who she was, and for how Esmeralda brought joy and laughter every day. Sophia felt like the luckiest person in the world and knew she would never take this life and love for granted. Turning the corner, she spotted someone who looked familiar. At first, she thought it was just her eyes playing tricks on her, but as she drew closer, she realized she wasn't imagining things. Helena, the woman who had once been a part of her life, turned around, holding the hands of children, one in each hand. When she saw it was Sophia, she gasped and her eyes filled with tears. "Sophia, how are you?" she asked. Sophia smiled at her mother-in-law, who seemed to have lost all the sparkle she had years ago. Her once smooth skin was now lined with wrinkles. "I'm well. Who are these lovely children with you?" She gestured to the kids Helena was holding. "Hi, sweeties. How are you?" The children, engrossed in looking at the nearby park, didn't notice Sophia's greeting. "I'm so sorry, Sophia," Helena suddenly apologized. "It's all right, Helena. I hold no grudges against you. I'm sorry for everything that happened. What's happened to you?" Helena's eyes filled with tears. "I was so blind, Sophia. I thought money and status were everything, but I've learned my lesson. Being kind to people is what truly matters." Sophia responded, "I'm glad you've come to realize that, and I want to offer you something. The company can be yours if you want it." Helena shook her head. "No, Sophia, I don't want it. I've realized that money isn't everything. I've just experienced the change myself. I know it's late, but this is my daughter, Esmeralda Pereira. Carlos and I married and had a beautiful daughter." Sophia removed the cloth covering Esmeralda and gestured for Helena to see her. "Esmeralda, Helena," Sophia said, her voice trembling with emotion. Helena saw Esmeralda and felt a wave of emotion. No one had ever named a child after her before. She had always been the one causing pain and suffering. Now, this beautiful, innocent child bore her name. Tears welled in Helena's eyes as she looked at Esmeralda, feeling a sense of pride and joy she had never known before. She reached out with a trembling hand and gently touched Esmeralda's cheek. "Oh, my dear," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I'm so honored. I don't deserve this, but I'm so grateful." Sophia smiled and hugged Helena tightly. "You deserve it, Helena. You deserve all the love and joy in the world." As Helena held Esmeralda, she felt a sense of redemption, realizing she had been given a second chance to be a good grandmother to this little girl, to be a better person. "We want to go to the park! We want to go to the park!" the children she was holding said in unison. Helena smiled and nodded. "Not today, kids, but I promise we'll have fun anyway." Sophia asked curiously, "These little ones are from the orphanage where I do volunteer work. I'm helping take care of them today. They have no family, so I like to spend time with them and make them feel loved." "Oh, Helena, that's amazing. I had no idea you were involved with an orphanage. How did you get started?" "I realized I'd been given a second chance and wanted to use it to make a difference in others' lives. These children deserve love and care, and I'm happy to provide that for them." "You know," Sophia said, "despite our past differences, I'd like to extend an olive branch. I'd love for you to come to our house for dinner sometime." Helena was surprised by the invitation. She hadn't expected Sophia to reach out, especially after everything that had happened. "I don't know, Sophia," Helena said hesitantly. "I'm not sure if it's a good idea." Sophia nodded. "I know we haven't always agreed, but I think it's time to leave the past behind. We are family after all, and I'd like to get to know you better. I also believe it's time for you and Carlos to reconcile." Helena was touched by Sophia's words. She never expected her daughter-in-law to extend a hand, especially after everything that had happened. "All right," Helena said. "I'll come to dinner, but just me, not the children from the orphanage." Sophia smiled. "Of course, just you. I'll make sure to prepare something special." Helena stood outside Sophia's house, taking a deep breath before ringing the doorbell. It had been years since she had seen her son Carlos, and she didn't know what to expect. The door opened, and Sophia greeted her with a warm smile. Helena stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on Carlos. He looked older, more mature, but his eyes still bore a hint of the pain she had caused. "Carlos," she called out, not moving from her spot. "Mom," Carlos responded, his voice tinged with hesitation. Helena took a step forward, extending her hands. "Carlos, I don't know where to start. I'm so sorry for everything I've done. I was wrong to treat you the way I did." Carlos looked at her warily, but Sophia stepped closer, placing a hand on his arm. "Carlos, please listen to her." He nodded, and Helena continued. "I know I can never undo the pain I caused, but I want you to know that I love you. I always have, and I'm proud of the man you've become." He searched her face for sincerity. She had hurt him deeply, and it had taken him a long time to heal. But now she was here, and slowly, he nodded. "I love you too, Mom." Helena felt a lump form in her throat as Carlos opened his arms. She moved into his embrace, holding him tightly. For a moment the world seemed to stop, and it was as if they were the only two people there. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, tears streaming down her face, not bothering to wipe them away. Carlos wiped his own tear-filled eyes. "I forgive you, Mom. I forgive you." As they hugged, Sophia smiled, feeling at peace. This was what she had wanted for so long, Carlos and Helena reconciling. After a few moments, Carlos pulled back, smiling. "Let's sit down. We have a lot to talk about." Helena nodded, smiling back, and the three of them sat in the living room, talking and laughing together as it should be. As the evening went on, Helena felt a joy she hadn't experienced in years. She had her son back, and she was grateful. Carlos held his wife's hand, sharing a look that spoke of all the blessings in his life. She was the greatest of all. "Thank you," he said, his lips curving into a smile that made her feel like a schoolgirl who had just fallen in love.